Here goes nothing. 5, 4, 3.
The Mac Observer's Mac Geek App, episode 822 for Monday, June 29th, 2020.
Folks, and welcome to the Mac Observer's Mac Geek Gab, the show where you send in your questions, your tips, your cool stuff found, all that stuff, so that we can take it, organize it into an agenda, answer your questions, share your tips, share your cool stuff found, share our tips, share our cool stuff found. The goal is we each learn at least 5 new things every single time we get together. Sponsors for this episode include Otherworld Computing with their new Envoy Express, mintamobile.com/MGG, and ancestry.com/MGG. We will talk more about all 3 of those later. For now, here in Durham, New Hampshire, I'm Dave Hamilton.
And here in Fairfield, Connecticut, this is Jon F. Braun.
How you doing today, Mr. Jon F. Braun?
Yeah, hanging in there.
Good. Yeah, it's nice having nice weather outside. We actually spent most of the day outside yesterday, which was very nice. Hanging out in the woods.
We had a torrential downpour. It was dandy.
We were supposed to get one. Yeah, we need the water too. We're due for one this afternoon. So, you want to take us to? I don't remember if this one is Louis or Louis. So,
I think it's Louis.
Okay, you want to? Well, take it away, Mr. Braun.
But here we go. Hi guys. I'm not sure if you guys ever mentioned this, but a quick way to flush your Mac of most purgeable system files is to simply run the Boot Camp Assistant. The first thing it does is to make as much space as it can. You can just simply quit after the purge. I ran it now, and my disk space went from 50 gigs free to over 100.
Huh. That's pretty smart.
Yeah, I did that too, and it freed something up. So, okay. Add another one to your toolkit there.
Huh. Yeah, I mean, my guess is the Boot Camp Assistant won't exist once we move to Big Sur based on the conversation we had in the last episode. But that's yet another one. That kind of reminds me of that trick on iOS. If you need to free up space, where you say you want to purchase a movie that's larger than the amount of space you have, and it'll tell you can't fit it. But before it tells you can't fit it, and therefore you haven't purchased it, it goes through and like purges your space pretty aggressively. So yeah, well, that's pretty good. I haven't tried that one in a while though, so I can't promise it still works, but yeah, pretty good. I stumbled across another one here this week, John, and that's that the 5-finger swipe on your trackpad changes to a new space. And I stumbled on it by accident because I guess I did a 5-finger swipe on my trackpad, and suddenly, the screen is blank. And I mean, I knew that I was in a new space, but it was like, okay, wait, I've found myself here before. How do I get here? And I'm like, is it 4? No, it's not 4. Okay, it's 5. Great. So I did my 5-finger swipe and everything was good. But so there's that tip, which if you use spaces regularly, you already know because you're constantly sort of muscle memory doing that anyway. For those of us like me that don't use spaces actively, that's a good thing to remember, because as I did it, I'm like, wait a minute, this is great. If I need to do like a screen video or screen capture or something, I can totally just do this with by moving to a new space, and then everything's clean and clear and all of that stuff. So it's just one of those, it's why the quick tips exist. It's like, oh, right. Remember, there's this thing there. So, yeah. Do you use spaces in that way, John? No. Okay. Doug brings us a quick tip, John. And, we were talking last week in our special WWDC episode, which I love doing, by the way. That was a blast, I thought. So thank you for making your schedule work such that we could do that. That's good. But Doug said in that episode, you mentioned that you cloned your internal drive and to an external, and then upgraded the external to Big Sur, which is true. He says, since your internal drive is Catalina, it therefore is APFS. You know that you can just create another volume on it and install Big Sur into that if you have the space. And so Doug's point is right on. And while I'd like to say that my decision to do this was 100% driven by the fact that I wouldn't really have enough space to run, Big Sur alongside Catalina on my laptop, I'd be lying if I said that was actually the reason. Quite frankly, I hadn't even considered it. I've totally forgot that in our APFS world, it's super easy to do exactly what Doug describes. So the end result would have been the same, but it is a good thing to remember. And I may wind up doing exactly what Doug describes on like my iMac down in the office so that I can have Big Sur running there for things that I want to test or whatever, and then just easily bounce back to Catalina. So thank you for that reminder. And it really is as easy as Doug says. You just go into disk utility and you highlight the disk and you say add volume, and it's like, yeah, okay, you're all set. New volume. So is that how you did it, John, or did you do external drive?
I don't know if I'm entirely comfortable putting a beta operating system on the same drive as my
all right.
day-to-day stuff.
What would the difference be? I mean, because either way, I mean, your volume isn't necessarily going to be decrypted and mounted if you boot from Big Sur, right? I mean, the volume itself is the thing that's encrypted. So, so you wouldn't, I mean, you would be keeping your main boot drive, your main boot volume unmounted in that scenario, right? I'm just trying to process like what's the functional difference between having it. I mean, if you're doing it on an external drive, like your internal drive is still there, so I don't know. Yeah. So anyway.
Yeah, I just rather have it on its own drive.
Yeah, no, I get that. Yeah, for sure. All right, you want to take us to Scott with another quick tip here?
Sure. Once, oh gosh, I got the sign-in prompt again.
Oh,
but anyway,
nice.
Scott has a good, I don't know. Google Docs always does this to me, but now today it just did it like a second.
Mid-show.
All right.
Yeah. It's so nice. Yeah.
All right. So here's what Scott says. Here's a good one. Gents, when I heard the segment on show 819 about the lost phone, thankfully returned to its owner, I want to talk from my own quick tip. I've modified the photo used as my lock screen by doing some ultra simple editing and preview. As you can see in the screenshot of my lock screen, I have a phone number shown for anyone that finds the phone. Just press the power button or touch the screen, and there it is. It's not my iPhone number, but rather a Google Voice number that can be easily redirected to any number I want. You could just as easily put a landline or office number. I've also added the ICE in case of emergency number for my spouse in the event something happens when I'm out biking. First responders tell me that they all recognize ICE numbers and in fact will search a phone for one if it's unlocked when they attend to someone. Putting these two numbers, and they could even be the same, on your lock screen can save a whole lot of grief and even keep you from getting caught. So,
I like that. Well, that's a good idea.
Screenshot. So yeah, so if you don't fully populate your contact card, which so the tip we had in the past is that you can ask a phone who it belongs to, and if the contact card for the person is in there, it's going to show all that information or speak all that information. But this is a good backup.
Yeah.
And I learned at least one new thing, Dave. I haven't been in that section of my phone. I still have the default background, but I didn't know you could do a different home screen and lock screen. So
interesting.
There you go.
Yeah, right. You totally can. That's right. Yeah. No, it's like these are the bonus quick tips. I've got another bonus for you, John. So it is not uncommon. This is the first time it's happened to you mid-show, or at least that you've mentioned it mid-show, that you had to relog into Google Docs because that's where we keep our agenda document. And if you join us while we stream the show at live.macgeekgab.com, not only do you get to see our smiling faces nowadays, but you can also follow along with the agenda because we do make it in Google Docs so that you folks can help us. And we always appreciate that help, putting links in and that sort of thing. Where I'm going with this is I don't launch that agenda in a web browser. I launch that agenda in a separate app that I've created called MGG Timestamps or Chapters or something, MGG Agenda maybe. And where I created it, you've already given me too much credit, folks, because I didn't do a whole lot of work to create an app. I used Fluid App. to do this. And Fluid lets you take web pages and save them as compartmentalized apps. So it's great because, Google, you can be logged in a bunch of different ways. And as you've experienced, John, it can be a real mess. Well, with Fluid App, you have this compartmentalized web browser that is for one thing and one thing only. And so for me, it's very rare, maybe once a year that I have to re-log in to Google Docs because I'm not using that web browser for anything else. It just launches this and it's good to go. So that's my quick tip / cool stuff found is Fluid App. And there are others out there, arguably some that may be better than Fluid App, but I use Fluid Apps. It's at fluidapp.com. It's just Fluid, but I call it Fluid App because I think of it that way. So anyway, and the nice part about that is, when we do the show, it's important to me to have things in the right place on the screen at all times so that I can just muscle memory get myself there. Well, because this is its own app, it can be in exactly the same spot every time and all of that. So and I can click an icon in the dock that brings me right to the agenda, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, I share the advice with you, but also by explaining a little bit, maybe help some other folks. Yeah, good. Keep moving.
Very good.
Sweet. Kenny wrote in and told us that Monoprice now has their own mesh system. And he says, I know Wi-Fi is an important topic, and I know that you guys like this stuff. Have you ever checked it out? And the answer is no, I have not checked out the new mesh system from Monoprice. You said something interesting in pre-show, John. You said, boy, everybody's got their own mesh system now. And it's true. And, it's interesting. I have PR folks from several different vendors, even as we speak, sort of pestering me. Have you talked about our new mesh system yet? And, my comments to them are, well, are you doing anything to differentiate yourself such that it would make sense for us to advise our listeners to go and buy your thing over the things that are tried and true and all of that? Now, it doesn't mean that there's not going to be progress in the market. In fact, I think that's a good thing, as you probably could figure out over the years. But we don't want to mislead you folks just because it's something new that a PR person is pestering us about. That said, Monoprice, this intrigues me. I was not aware until Kenny's note. Maybe I was aware, but I really hadn't paid attention to the fact that Monoprice had a mesh system out. Now, Monoprice's approach to things is something that intrigues me, especially when it comes to a mesh system, because what Monoprice has done, for example, with displays like the one I have to my right here in the studio, is they go and find the best of the best, right? Like, what's the top of the line one that people actually buy but spend some hard-earned money on? And then they sort of distill that down. They take a look at it and say, what's the one thing or two things in this that actually matter to make it good? And in a display, I think they based theirs, at least the one that we use, John, on the Dell display, which is known to be, it's not, like super hoopty, but it's the expensive sort of, higher end display. And they realize, oh, it's, the glass. So let's use the exact same glass that Dell uses. And then we'll put our own shell around it and save some money in different ways here and sell it to people for, what turns out to be about half the price. Therefore, and they apply that line of thinking sort of across the board at Monoprice. That's how they've done what they do certainly when it comes to technology. That's what makes me really interested about a Monoprice mesh system, John, because if they've applied that same approach there, now I'm intrigued. So, because I think the price on it is pretty good. I mean, I think it was like for a 3-way unit, a router and 2 extenders, satellite extenders, they call it, but it's, a 3-unit mesh system. It's $135. So, and that's at 10% off. So it's normally $150. Well, that's still really aggressively priced. That might be the least expensive mesh system we've seen that we've liked. Doesn't mean we like the Monoprice one, only because we haven't tried it yet. We're going to mess with it. We'll take a look. And if any of you folks have actually used it, please let us know your experience too. Feedback at MacGeekGab.com. That's where we like that stuff.
Did I hear you say feedback at MacGeekGab.com, Dave?
Yeah, you did, John. I said feedback at MacGeekGab.com, and that's because I want people to send in their notes to us, because this is important. So yeah, cool. I'm excited. I'm excited here. All right. Any other thoughts on that discussion of mesh or anything like that, John?
Yeah, we got to see how they differentiate themselves, because I'm pretty sure, like with a lot of things, Dave, the chipset is, there's not a whole bunch of people that make mesh networking chipsets, right?
Right.
I mean, there are a couple. You know better than I do. There's a couple of major players, right?
Yeah, Qualcomm's the big one that's used. If it's not used in everything, it's used in most of the thing. So, yeah.
Or you can make your own. Fun.
Yeah. Mesh is hard though, and we got a question later in the show. We'll talk more about this. But mesh is not it's not just like grab a chipset and go. There is a lot of nuance and a lot of learning that needs to be done to get there. So yeah. So anyway, we'll see. Jim asks, speaking of networking stuff, it's a cool stuff found baked inside it, masquerading as a question. Sort of. He says, I was watching business news on TV the other day and I saw the developer of the Firewalla being interviewed. He says, I'm not sure if you've heard of it, and if so, what your thoughts are on this as a security solution. So the Firewalla is something interesting. We've tested this over the years. We've never I don't know that we've talked about it much on the show. The idea is that you plug this thing into your network and all your data passes through it. It's one of those sorts of things. And they've got parental controls, and you can do a VPN with it, and you can do, family time and ad blocking and all of the things that you would want to do to protect your network. We always say it's up to the router manufacturers to do, to embed this stuff in their devices so that your gateway to and from the internet is the thing that's protecting you. Well, Firewalla sort of sits just past your router, and all your data passes through it before it gets to your router. So that's where that works. The problem with Firewalla over the years, even the high-end one, is that it was not using gigabit speeds. And so if you had anything over 100 megabit per second Wi-Fi, or not Wi-Fi, 100 megabit per second service from your ISP, this would artificially limit you down. And so, again, it was one of those things where they were like, well, you should talk about this on the show. I'm like, well, I don't know. Like, our listeners, there's like, well, we found that most people don't really have that kind of speed. I'm like, well, we found that people do, and our listeners do. And so we've never really talked about it before. However, they've got Firewalla Gold coming out summer 2020, which is, we are in summer of 2020, it turns out, John, just as of a couple of days ago, right? And so that says multi-gigabit cybersecurity protection, which makes this more interesting to me. Not only do the ports have to be gigabit, but the chipset in there, the CPU has to run fast enough to do all this processing and still pass your data at gigabit speeds. So this now gets very interesting to me. So we'll reach back out to them and check it out. But yeah, I like the concept of these things, and frankly, I liked what I saw with the Firewalla stuff. It just didn't. I guess the Firewalla Blue one had ports that went faster than it had a gigabit port on it, but it did not have the CPU power to really get up to gigabit speeds, which was part of the issue. So we'll dig back in. It's pretty exciting. I'm glad to see that they're working at it. Thoughts on this, John? Did you ever check out the Firewalla?
No, but I did check out another product, if you recall. I think the Bitdefender product, and their first gen suffered from a similar fate. It only had a 100 gigabit Ethernet port on it, because
100 megabit.
100 megabit, and I was, or maybe it did have a gigabit, but the thing is, it effectively would cap you at the lower speed. And I'm like, well, what's up with that? And as you pointed out, the thing is, these things have to do a lot of work. And if the processor is too wimpy, then
you can't do the work fast enough. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I have their next generation product in my pile of things to look at. So
cool. Cool.
I have to check that out.
Yeah. Yeah. Somebody in the chat room, Dogster in the chat room points out that it is $396 for Firewalla Gold. So he, as he says in the chat room, that's some gold. So yeah, we'll see. You're right though. That's got to do quite a bit to justify that cost, because you can buy a router that can do this. Like the Synology router can do a lot of this stuff and do gigabit speeds. And it's not only all of that, it's a router and a very strong Wi-Fi access point. And it's like less than $200. So we shall see. Maybe there's more to this. So, we're always open. And speaking of always open, John, Apple this past week, I consider this cool stuff found because of what they did. So Apple, there's always been sort of an issue with App Store reviews, right? We've even run into it here where with our Geek Gab iOS app, which if you don't have, go get it. It's free. And it lets you sort of track the shows and listen and even chat live and that sort of thing. But, we had a problem with them a couple of years ago where they said, oh, you can't have this app in the store because it has the name Mac in it. And I was like, first of all, dude, like this has been here for a long time. Like we submitted a bug update, and they were like, oh yeah, the app's bounced. Like we're going to remove it from the store. So I just had to tell them the story. I don't know if I ever told this story on the show, that Steve Jobs was the one that approved this podcast for the Apple, for the iTunes store when it came out. So we started this show. I'll tell the story. Why not? We started this show 3 weeks before the iTunes update came out that had the Apple podcast directory in it. But they had already announced it. Like the update came out the week before Macworld Expo Summer New York. I think it was the last of the summer, or maybe Summer Boston even, but it was the Summer Macworld, whatever it was. Yeah, it was definitely Boston, and the last of them. But Steve Jobs had announced it at their March event that same year of 2005. And so, we only had a couple of weeks from when the show launched to when iTunes and its directory, went live. And I was like, well, I definitely want to make sure we're in the iTunes directory, right? Like, no question. So I started contacting my friends at Apple and, asking like, who's running the directory? I just want to make sure we're in it. That's all. And this was at a time when Steve was running Apple and things were nutso over there. And everybody was like, well, I don't want to be the one to point you and then I'll get fired. Everybody was paranoid about like anything, because that's just how it was. And finally, I got really frustrated with like this. I'm like, what a stupid way to run a company, to have everybody paranoid, to actually help and do this thing that it turns out is a pet project of the CEO. Like, this is crazy. So I thought, you know what? I'm just going to write the CEO. So I wrote Steve. 20 minutes later, my phone rings, and it's the person that at the time was in charge of the podcast directory. And he's like, hey, so I'm glad I got you. We got your email, and I just wanted to let you know that you are in the directory. You were already in the directory. In fact, we had already found you and slurped you in. But I just wanted to let you know you're in it, and we're going to feature you that first week. And this is great. You got a great thing going on, and this is perfect for our audience and all this stuff. And thank you so much for your email. It's like, all right, well, that worked. and they did feature us that first week, and that was when we. Yeah. We went from like having 1,000 listeners to like 20,000 listeners, and it was like, oh, I guess we're going to keep doing this show. So
we're Steve approved.
We were Steve approved, but I had to point that out to the App Store. Back from the tangent. We're here. And then they came around and they were like, oh yeah, right. We'll just approve you. I mean, like they do protect because Mac is an Apple trademark, so they do protect their trademarks. Right. But that one has been kind of like the Mac one. They did not defend enough in the beginning. And so they kind of have to let that go. And they do, which is fine. But there have been some issues with the App Store review process where, certain apps, and most recently it was the Hey email app that was, went through this process. Well, And it turned into this, Apple saying no, and then it turned into this sort of public Twitter thing where Apple did come around and they both sort of found middle ground and everybody got to save face and move forward and do the right thing. And Apple wasn't wrong with the Hey thing. They essentially, Hey has a subscription only email service, and the app only worked with their subscription only email service. So if you downloaded it from the store and you didn't already have a Hey subscription, the app simply didn't do anything. It was useless. And you couldn't do an in-app purchase because the Hey people didn't want to give Apple 30%. And so there was this big thing. And Apple suggested that they add some other features to it that make it useful out of the gate. And then they did. And now everybody's happy. So Apple at WWDC this week announced two things. Number one, they announced that their App Store review process was being expanded so that you could file appeals in a more codified way. But even bigger than that, they said you can also, in a codified way, as opposed to just go to Twitter and complain and hope that it picks up steam, they now have a new codified way of challenging the policies that they are using to, point out and say your app should not be in the store, which I thought was even better because, Apple runs this. I mean, it's a walled garden and it's Apple's walls. So and they've been getting into some trouble right recently for this in the EU and stuff. So, I mean, there's a reason that they're doing this, but I think it's a good thing. I was reminded of when they just unceremoniously pulled any app that had to do with any product for like vaping from the App Store. And one of the things that got pulled out was from this company called Pax. They always show up at CES and everything. And they make vapes for cannabis products. But like their app would do things like you could put a child lock on your vape and you could control the temperature and also like make sure that the cartridge that you're putting in there is certified all the way back to the vendor and you could see test results and all that. And I was like, this seems like a good thing. Like, wouldn't you want to be able to know that the thing you're putting in there isn't like some bathtub vape cartridge that somebody cooked up and used vitamin E in and it's going to hurt you? Like all that stuff seemed really good, but it just unceremoniously got bounced. And so, maybe they can challenge that. In the meantime, by the way, those people really smartly built a web app that connects via Bluetooth to your device. It can only work in Chrome. I guess Safari doesn't have a path for Bluetooth LE stuff, but the Chrome, they have a Chrome, you run it in Chrome, but it's just like a web app for Pax, which I thought was really interesting. It was a good little solution. But anyway, I like the fact that Apple has this policy challenge thing. I thought that was good. I don't know. What do you think about that, John?
It's their garden. It's their party.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. It is. It's their. Yeah, no, you're not wrong. It's their party.
But I'm sure there have been cases where that fee has been negotiated, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Oh, yeah. They're not public, but for sure. I guarantee you. Well, if it's for a subscription, there's something in there. I'm going to get this wrong. Maybe somebody in the chat room will help us out. But I thought for a subscription, it was like 30% for the first one, either month or year or whatever. And then for all subsequent ones on a subscription, it was only 15% that Apple was taking. But I don't know. I'm not like there are two tiers. There's 30 and 15. And I think 15 is for the subsequent subscriptions. But even yeah. But like Netflix, I guarantee you never paid 30% to Apple for anything. Mm-hmm. And now you can't sign up in the store. I still have my Netflix account paid for through the App Store, which is great because I can do it with like gift cards and things like that, which I like. But yeah. So 30% of Dogster in the chat room is saying correct. Apple typically charges a 30% cut of any sales, although that rate falls to 15% for the second and later years of any subscription. Okay, so the brain's working this morning. It's good. All right. You want to take us? We got some tips, John. You want to take us to Bill?
Yeah. So this is a case of something not working, and why doesn't it work? Well, we'll tell you why. So Bill says, in Geek Gab 819, you discussed the new battery health management feature in macOS 10.15.5. I had been wondering why I didn't see this feature on my 2014 MacBook Pro after upgrading the operating system. Someone pointed me to this section of Apple's support page. Basically, the gist of it is that buried deep within the article, there's a provision that you have to have 10.15.5 and Thunderbolt 3 ports. And guess what his machine doesn't have?
Oh, right.
Now, I don't know if it's, I don't know if that's because there's something in the Thunderbolt 3 chip that is used to manage this feature, or if it's just they had to put a line in the sand somewhere saying, okay, we're only going to support this feature from this point forward. I suspect there must be something magic in the Thunderbolt 3 chip.
Sure.
Maybe not.
Yeah, I see
on
what
the
you're
USB-C side, not the Thunderbolt side, because the USB-C is doing all the power management, right? Well, Thunderbolt does too. So
yeah.
Anyways, yeah, I searched around and I couldn't really find an answer to this. If it's something in the Thunderbolt 3 hardware, I want to dig a little deeper though. I want to know why this is.
Yeah, right. Huh.
So thanks, Bill.
Yeah, you're right. It's got to be either something in the Thunderbolt chipset or something else that Apple added at exactly the same time, right? In that chipset. So, yeah, interesting. All right, let's see. So that's Bill. We do have. Well, this is sort of a tip and sort of a cool stuff found. The lines get blurred sometimes, and it's okay. Listener John says, all right. Oh, he said when he was typing, he wrote his email. He says, hey, Dave and John. And he said that when he was typing John, he accidentally hit 2 N's. And his Mac auto-completed it to what we all think your new nickname is, which is Johnny Cakes. I don't know why his phone expanded it to Johnny Cakes.
Johnny Cakes.
What's
a Johnny Cake?
I have no idea. I have no idea.
For me.
It's a cake for you. That's right. But he says his cool stuff found is called Runbooks. He says, and he's going to give us some examples of how he used this. He says, being a professional IT person, and a stage manager before that, he says, I live my life by to-do and checklists. He says, years ago in stage management and then in IT, he says, I discovered using Runbooks. These are simply standard operating procedure checklists for IFT. He says, in my IT department, we use Asana to group collaborate these. He says some larger IT operations use other things like, IT glue or whatever. He says, but simply put, they are one of two things, replacing checklists. They are one of two things, repeating checklists that populate on a specific schedule and get assigned to the proper person, or a library of IFT actions for when things happen, i.e. pull the runbook and then use the template to create your check or task list to resolve the issue. He says, I wanted to share the idea, and he gives a couple of examples. He says it works great for any number of things because he's now using this at home. He says his home to-dos he uses it for his home to-dos that are more than a single thing. Like monthly, my dog needs flea and tick, treatment. He says, but the day before, she can't have a bath through the day after. He says, so I have 3 tasks in that list that have 3 different due dates, all related to each other. And he can just, magically place them as a group all at the same time. He says, another example, daily chores for the kids. He says, for example, I have a list for each day of the week that goes under each kid's shared area and automatically repeats for each day. So I can tell from my phone when they claim to be done that they have checked everything off. He says, of course, repeating tasks for my home IT stuff, like check the firmware in all my network devices every month. You'd be surprised. He says how many times firmware updates regularly, but he puts everything on so that it's not just check the firmware and then he has to remember what each of those things are. He just has this run book, which creates all of these to-dos for him. So he knows to check his router and his mesh access points and his QNAP and his switches and his TVs and home automation hubs and all those things. So very cool idea. I like this. So obviously we'll put a link to Runbooks, but it's repeating sets of tasks is really the right way to think of it. And I appreciate you sending all those examples, John, because quite frankly, without them, it wouldn't have made sense to me. So we're hoping it makes sense to all of you. Thoughts on that, Mr. Braun?
No.
Okay.
Keep a list.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
No, it's good. Yeah, I think it's pretty cool. All right. Listener Ben, you want to take us to Ben, John?
Yeah. Ben's got it's actually maybe uncool. I don't know. Ben says, on Mac keyboards with an eject key, the shortcut to access the shutdown dialog with options to restart, sleep, or shut down has been Control Eject, where the eject key has been replaced with a power and or Touch ID key. This shortcut doesn't work. Regarding the Touch ID key, nor do other past shortcuts that utilize the power button work. However, this dialog is still accessible by holding the power key for 2 seconds, as Apple mentions here. I consistently find this faster than mousing to the Apple menu. Okay. Well, I guess the takeaway there is that if you have Touch ID, you can't do this.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's funny because actually on my Mac Mini, I can do both because my Logitech keyboard has an eject key and the Mac Mini has a power button.
Right. Right.
As mentioned, the Touch ID key is the power key on the newer MacBooks, and if you hold down the power key, you don't get that dialog, or at least I didn't. If I held it down long enough, though, it would shut the machine down.
Shut your computer off. Yeah.
It's like, wait a second, let me test this, because it's kind of the power key, but it's not.
Huh. That's
I was also looking.
Yeah.
Now it gets even more interesting if you have one of these Touch ID and with the little display as well. You can put a sleep shortcut in the touch bar, but you can't put a shortcut for anything else. I was like, oh, I wonder if you could maybe get around this problem by putting it there, but you can't. At least not the default set of things you can put in the touch bar. So.
Yeah, that's right. Interesting. Yeah. Huh. Yeah, I don't know whether I'm looking in the chat room here because some people are sharing things, but I think it's all. I don't. Yeah, they're saying Dogster again is saying Command Control Media Eject quits all apps, then restarts the Mac. Yeah, if any open out. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, I don't know that there is a way for this. We'll circle back if there is. Speaking of circling back, Brian Monroe put a link to an article from Eclectic Light, Howard Oakley's site, about this battery health management 10.15.5 thing. And the additional requirement is that you need a T1 or T2 chip. So I think maybe that happened in coincidence with the Thunderbolt 3 ports being added. But that's certainly that's the thing, according to Howard. And with stuff like this, man, I tend to trust Howard because that dude knows what he's doing. So, yeah, good. All righty. Man, we have so much stuff to get through. I'm so eager to get to all these questions. I'm also eager to tell you about our sponsors. So, John, if that works with you, let's do it.
Please.
All right. Our first sponsor for today is Mint Mobile at mintmobile.com/MGG, where you can go to cut your wireless bill to just $15 a month. It's true. You know, it's hard to believe if you're like me and you came from using one of the big cell providers, right? Because that's not a price that makes sense in that world. But Mint saw that and they decided to address that by cutting their expenses down, right? So they eliminated the traditional costs of retail and all of that other stuff, and they just passed that savings along to you. And the service is fantastic. Every plan comes with unlimited nationwide talk and text, plus crazy fast 4G LTE. I've been using this for over a year, testing it, when we were traveling all over the place, of course, here at home now. And the connections and speeds, it just works. And the pricing is really great. And you can use your own phone number with your Mint Mobile plan. And you know, you keep all your existing contacts. I mean, you know how that works. We're Apple people. We're used to all of that kind of thing. And they are too. They know how important it is for things like visual voicemail and all that stuff to work. And so they do. So to get your new wireless plan for just $15 a month and get the plan shipped to your door for free, go to mintmobile.com/MGG. That's mintmobile.com/MGG. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/MGG. And our thanks to Mint Mobile for sponsoring this episode. Our next sponsor is Otherworld Computing at MacSales.com. And they've got now their new Envoy Express. This is big news because this is a bus-powered Thunderbolt 3 certified portable storage enclosure, which means it's a do-it-yourself kit that allows us to break free of all the pre-configured choice limits in order to build pocket-sized bus-powered storage that meets our needs. So instead of having to pick what's just off the shelf, you get to pick and set it up, right? Because it's designed to support any 2280 M.2 NVMe SSD. So it's got all the guts to go really fast and give you the freedom of flexibility to use any drive today, including like OWC's Aura SSDs up to a 4 terabyte capacity, as well as being ready for tomorrow's 8 terabyte and 16 terabyte future capacities. Like I said, it's bus powered, and it's the first bus powered enclosure that meets the stringent Thunderbolt power requirements. We've talked about that here. This is important. You got to make sure it meets those. Otherwise, it ain't going to work right for you. Super fast. It supports up to 1,553 megabytes per second real world performance. And it's ready to go, complete with a 10.2 inch Thunderbolt 3 cable. So go check it out. You just go check it out. Otherworld Computing at MacSales.com. Our thanks to Otherworld Computing for doing stuff like this and for sponsoring this episode. Our next sponsor is Ancestry at ancestry.com/MGG. You know, it's been more than 75 years since all those soldiers, maybe even your grandfather, left home for World War II. And you may be familiar with the major events and battles of World War II, but there are so many more stories to uncover. You know, there was the Tuskegee Airmen, the all-African-American squad of fighter pilots, the incredible women who trained to become pilots and mechanics, the Japanese-American battalion that became one of America's first most decorated units, right? Despite all the discrimination against Japanese-Americans at the time. And they've gone crazy here at Ancestry because in honor of the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II, they have just released a U.S. draft card collection from World War II with over 36 million draft cards completed by fighting age men in the U.S. and across the country during the time, whether they ended up serving or not, right? So they've got 36 million draft cards. You got to go through and look. You can find your old family members. We were doing this and having so much fun with it. It's just an amazing thing to be able to peek back into history. These things that people filled out, your relatives, my relatives filled out at a whim, but probably a stressful moment too, right? And now you get to kind of look back and see these things. Very, very cool. Go check it out. Find and honor your ancestors who served in World War II. Get a new take on your ancestors' World War II experience and discover World War II from the diverse perspectives of those who were there. Discover your untold stories and more. Head to our URL at ancestry.com/MGG to start discovering your story today. That's at ancestry.com/MGG. And our thanks to Ancestry for sponsoring this episode.
All right, Dave.
Yes, John.
Steve is in a world of hurt here.
Okay.
I think he's running out of time now.
All right.
Jack Bauer. He's running out of time, I think. So Steve says he has an iMac 27-inch late 2009. Wow. Maybe time for a new Mac. But running High Sierra 10.13.6. It is showing 900 gigabytes in the system category. I'm going to assume that he has a 1 terabyte drive.
That's a lot. Yeah.
That's not right. I've tried Disutility and Clean My Mac to reduce the size of the system, with little effect. And when he says system, what we mean here is that if you go to About This Mac, there's a storage tab. You're going to see a hard drive, and then the machine's going to start churning and categorizing your items here. And his system category, I think, is the one. Or you have to click on Manage, and then it'll break it down a little more. And one category would be System. No, that shouldn't be that large. So anyways, that's where it is. So he tried to reinstall Mac OS and restore from an earlier time machine, but it says I have no room. I've turned off iCloud except for Find My Mac. I can run Safari, but Firefox and Chrome will not load. I've also tried to download other system utilities that might help solve the problem, but there's no room for the download. I've ordered an external drive so I can download a copy of Mac OS and try reinstalling to see if that helps. Do you have anything else that I can try? And I do, Dave. And I think you do as well. But let's just start here when I've run into this situation. So personally, Dave, I've run into this where the system just starts getting huge. One thing is so he said he ran disutility, but I don't know if he ran first aid. I've had first aid within disutility detect and repair space issues, or so it claims. So
sure.
That's one. Another thing that clears out some caches and stuff is safe mode. So, which I think is usually you hold down Shift when you boot. That gets you into safe mode, I think.
That's right. Yep.
So there's that. Another would be the maintenance option in Onyx, Dave. Now, you got to get Onyx specific for your OS.
Sure.
Which you told it what it is. Just a note, because sometimes I try to run Onyx and it's like, no, you're on the wrong version, dude. So,
right. I appreciate that about Onyx, by the way, the fact that you know, they are very intentional about not letting the wrong version of Onyx run on your OS, even if it might have been okay. Like, better to have them certify it, in my opinion. I think it's great. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So in Onyx specifically, they have a cleaning category, which it sounds like he needs some cleaning.
Yeah.
Or at least that was my assumption, because it lumped everything in system. And finally, Dave, we have the tip that we got earlier, is run the Boot Camp Assistant. Maybe that'll free things up here.
Oh, yeah.
So those are my suggestions, but then you gave another one, Dave, that I thought he had done, but he had not.
Huh. Yeah. Well,
right?
he said he had cleaned my Mac. If there's something taking up space, run Space Lens. Have it scour the drive and look for stuff that's taking up space. And you don't have to use Space Lens and Clean My Mac. That is now my current favorite, my current preferred one, because it just does a great job of highlighting it and making it easy to like remove or jump to the Finder. But Omni Disk Sweeper works as long as you kind of run it the right way. Daisy Disk works. There's many others. Whatever your tool of choice is for seeing what's being used space-wise on your drive, run that. And I think that's a good thing to run, 2-3 times a year kind of thing, just as a matter of course, because you will find things. It's like, I had no idea that this was taking X number of gigabytes. And he did. He had some cache file or something that was, I forget what he said it was.
Well, I thought it was it was weird. It was do you have it in front of you? Because he replied with the name of something very specific, which I think was like a media recording app. My head scratcher is why was it making the system category so huge? Oh, you know why? I think I answered my own question. So in the past, I've run so I like Omni Disk Sweeper.
Sure,
but it does similar function. But I found a lot of applications. If you go, I think, to system library application support, I think it is. One time I had an app, I think it was Steam, stored the entire binary for a game in there, and it was like multiple gigabytes. And I'm like, oh, that's what's taking up all my space.
Yeah.
So maybe this utility also would cache things in the system directory, and that's why it showed up in that category. I don't know.
Yeah. Interesting. All right. We got anything else on this one?
No, good.
Okay. Listener Brian has, we'll let listener Brian ask. I think I got this right.
Hey, Dave and John. I see you guys were talking about Synology again this week. About the RT2600 AC router and HomeKit. I know you said you've tested these devices, but have you added the MR2200AC mesh unit to it? Because I just did it this week and it completely screwed up all my HomeKit devices. They would constantly connect, not connect, no response. Most of my devices are iDevices, and I contacted them, and they said there's a problem with the MR2200AC in mesh mode. When you add the mesh unit, that's when the problem occurs, which I did notice. I was wondering if you have run across any of these problems with the Synology products, with the HomeKit, and what routers have you tested in mesh mode with the HomeKit and no issues? Thanks again. Don't get caught.
Yeah, you bet. You are correct in that my experience has matched yours. Recently, I went back and enabled and started using the mesh of the Synology stuff. I use their router almost all the time just because it's a great thing for managing my network. But in terms of mesh, I change things all the time, and I'm often running, whatever my home mesh is in bridge mode, kind of beyond the Synology router. But about a week ago, I decided it was time to circle back and check the Synology mesh stuff again. And I've checked it since it came out. And, like we were saying before in the episode, mesh is hard. It's not just about getting that Qualcomm chipset. It's about making sure you implement the right features and your devices know how to do the handoff from one to the other and all of that stuff. And it's usually the first generation of someone's mesh product doesn't work all that well. And especially as they add different features, there needs to be a testing. You can test in a lab, you can test in your own beta, environments. But once you roll this stuff out to people in the world, things change, right? And I found that with the Synology stuff for sure. They I don't know quite what the issue is, but things were definitely wonky around my house with exactly kind of the thing. I didn't quite get to the point where I had decided it was only HomeKit stuff, but it was definitely, the IoT stuff was being weird in general. Even some of my iDevices were being weird. And I tried a couple of different things. I went into the Synology router management interface and I went to Wi-Fi Connect, which is sort of the app inside the interface. They've got a fantastic web interface for their routers, just like they have for the disk stations. It's awesome. But you go to Wi-Fi Connect Wireless Advanced and disabled 802.11r, which is the fast roaming technology. And it's a standard, but not everybody implements the standard the same way. Eero had some problems with this when they first rolled out 802.11r. They had to move it to their Eero Labs thing so that people knew it was like, this might make things unstable. So because of knowing that, I went in and turned it off here and it got better, but it wasn't quite enough, but that might do it for you. So I would recommend that. And for anybody having trouble on their mesh systems, fast roaming sounds like a great idea, and it's really nice when it works for things like when you're walking around the house and you're on a call and, it just you're on like, whatever we call it, Wi-Fi calling or whatever, where it's relying on your internet signal. Like that quick handoff where it doesn't have to renegotiate security and all that really helps. However, things don't quite implement it right. There are other things in there that I didn't experiment with, AMPDU and things like that. But even disabling 802.11r didn't get me to a stable spot with the Synology mesh. So I kind of moved on from that in my tests. I'll circle back to it. This is, like I said earlier, this is what we do. And my family suffered from this, John. I asked my family after maybe 12 hours of having switched over to the Synology. They didn't know. I didn't say anything to them. And I'm like, hey, has anybody noticed anything with the Wi-Fi? And my daughter's like, yeah, I've been on LTE for the last day. She's like, I just turned off Wi-Fi. I'm like, cool. Next time, let me know so that I have data points on this stuff that, if it's not working for you, jump over. I'm glad we're on an unlimited, or not unlimited, but, we have plenty of bandwidth. So it's all good. There's no real unlimited anymore anyway. But So yes, the Synology mesh I have not quite found to be reliable enough to recommend, which is why we haven't really talked about it on the show. But it is good to bring this stuff up. So I'm glad you sent in your note, Brian. It's good. It's good. And any other thoughts on that, Mr. Braun?
Nope.
Okay. Darren Christopher writes in and says, I been an avid listener for 7 years. Great. Awesome. He says, I have a question and a bit of a dilemma. I am searching for a password manager that will be great to use cross-platform and for all my Apple devices. I'm looking for a way to share certain passwords with select people, family and friends, when times require it, i.e. being, say, gravely ill, and the ability to revoke such access when it's no longer needed. There's so many different options and choices, but I wondered what experience you guys may have had and what you might recommend. So I'm a 1Password user. I have been for a very long time. I've tried out LastPass. John, you use LastPass more regularly than me, and I'm curious. I'm curious to your thoughts about how, like, what of these features LastPass has. I always in my head think of 1Password as an Apple only product, but it really is not. They've expanded greatly over the recent years. So it is available for all your Apple stuff, iOS, macOS, Windows, Android, Linux, Chrome OS, and evidently even a command line version. LastPass is basically the same: macOS, iOS, Windows, Android, Linux, not Chrome OS, I don't think. But as far as I prefer 1Password, just their user experience is much smoother for me. LastPass has never quite worked for my brain, but 1Password's UX I found pretty smooth. For this kind of thing, 1Password makes this super easy. They operate under the concept of vaults. And so I have my own personal vault, and then I have a vault that's shared with my entire family, and then I have another vault that's shared just with my wife. And you can move things to and from different vaults, no problem. So that would be an easy way to do what you're talking about here, and in a very, very smooth, fluid scenario. So that's certainly one option. Does LastPass do this kind of thing, John?
I'm looking through the UI and I don't think so. I mean, I see a feature here, one of my logins, it has a little thing with a couple of heads, which is share. And if I click on that, it will, email a password to someone. Yeah, I don't know if you want to do that.
No, they do have shared folders, though, it looks like. They say shared folders is a special folder in your LastPass vault that you can use to securely and easily share sites and secure notes with other LastPass users. So yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
That's where you do that then.
Yep. That's pretty cool. Yeah. So there you go.
Okay.
So
I've never done that. And then they also have something, I guess, LastPass for Teams, though it looks like you may have to throw them some money. I would think that would be a more structured way of doing password management among a team, which isn't your family kind of part of
a team. Yeah, absolutely.
One would hope so.
Yeah, exactly. Right. No, that's kind of what we're using in 1Password is we have a license for a family license that I've got everybody in the family in on. And so it just, it just works. So, yep. Cool.
Yeah. I'll just mention it. I found it. I still have to try it. I don't see off the top of my head here a family feature or a share feature, but just because I love these guys, there's a fairly new kid on the block here, a new bear on the block, Dave. It's called remember.com from the folks that do TunnelBear. So they have a password manager, and it works looking here on iOS, Android, Windows, and Mac OS, extensions for Chrome, Firefox, and Safari. You want to check that out. I mean, if nothing else, you get a lot of cool bear puns.
Right. That's important. Huh. That's interesting. All right. Cool. Have you used this at all? Have you messed with it?
Not greatly.
So. Okay. Cool. We have a ton of questions. Yeah, we should. Absolutely. Before we get too far into the show, I did want to share, and I'm forgetting who put it in the chat room, but somebody put it in the chat room. It might have been Dogster, actually. back to our conversation about touch bar and not having a shutdown button there. Well, somebody figured out a way to do this with an automator action, and then you make it into an app, and then you can launch the app. So there's a link that I put back in that section so that it's there. It's not here at the 59-minute mark. It's at the 34-minute mark or whatever it was back in the show notes, where linking to this article. It's actually at the Apple discussion forum. So I just wanted to share that before we got too far out. All right. In the last episode, we were talking about all the stuff at WWDC. And one of the things that we got into was the idea about how could Windows run on these new Apple Silicon Macs, because they're no longer running Intel processors. So Greg wrote in and says, I got lost because I really didn't and still don't understand the definitions around emulation and virtualization. He says, as I understand it so far, Apple Silicon is not virtualization because that involves imitating hardware as a container. So Apple Silicon must represent emulation? No. So we may go deep on this, but we're going to try and give you kind of the TLDR up front here about the differences between emulation and virtualization quickly and succinctly. So to me, in this context, emulation means running code that is compiled for a different chipset, like running Intel code on ARM or PowerPC code on Intel. That's emulation because the software is acting like, aka emulating, another chipset. Now, virtualization means running a container on one operating system inside which a different operating system is running. This could mean virtualizing Windows on a Mac. It could also mean virtualizing Mac OS on a Mac inside its own container, like running Mojave inside of Catalina. In this case, the chipset, Intel, is the same for both operating systems. So there's no emulation happening. It's just virtualizing sort of another subcomputer inside the operating system, but it's all running the same code on the chipset because it's the same chip. Did I get it right, John?
Pretty much. I mean, to make it even shorter, virtualization is you're running code for the same chip that is piece of hardware or processor that is in the machine. Emulation is, doing this translation layer, and you're almost certainly going to take a performance hit because it's a lot of work, as far as I know. Yeah. That's exactly right. Yeah. Okay. I like that translation. So emulation is translation, and that is, like you said, that's a lot of work. In my mind. No, I like that word. That's a great way to distinguish those two. It's interesting though, Dave, because I remember, because I think at this point now, Windows is only really supported, though I could be wrong, Windows is only supported on an Intel chip. Well, no, remember the Surface. The Surface runs ARM chips. Okay. All right. You make a good point. So, all right. So, okay. I think I see a path there then. The thing is, I remember, Dave, when Windows NT came out, and Windows NT was a big deal. I remember when it came out, but it would run not only on Intel, but I think on MIPS, Alpha, and one other processor. Was it RISC? Was there a RISC version of Windows NT? Maybe it was PowerPC, or it could be. I don't know. Yeah. But I think at one point NT ran on 4 different processors, and then, everybody kind of, went to Intel. Yeah. But I remember that was a selling point when that first came out. It was like, wow, you have such a choice of hardware to run this operating system on. It's like, that's right. Pretty cool. Right. Yeah. So I think the Surface 3, Brian Monroe in the chat room is helping us narrow it down. He says some versions of the Surface run ARM. That's true. And there is a version of Windows 10 for ARM that runs on the Surface. And that version of Windows 10 will do emulation, translation of some Windows x86 apps over to ARM. However, and we mentioned this briefly in the previous episode, and we got a lot of comments on Twitter from people that were saying, yeah, but
the way Windows runs on ARM is not going to really actually run Windows. It's a limited feature set. It's a limited app set. So don't think that this is the path here. So it's probably not the path here. So my guess is Boot Camp just goes away with Apple Silicon. So, all right, good. I thought I think we did okay, John. I think we didn't get too we explained it, then we got off track. We're not off track, but then we dove a little deeper, which I like. That's good. Mm-hmm. All right, pat ourselves on the back. Nicely done. Anyway, it's hard for us to stay laser focused like that. Related to that same episode with Big Sur, Bill wrote in and said, you said you really like the Messages app in Big Sur's operating system because it's coming over with Project Catalyst and essentially is the same app that runs on iOS. He says, iOS, not iOS. He says, I'm concerned, though, that in merely porting the iOS app to the Mac users will lose the ability to share screens, which currently can be done in the Mac version of the app. Does Messages in Big Sur still have this capability? I believe it does. Yeah, it's not just a Catalyst port. It is the foundation of which is a Catalyst port. And then Apple kind of, added some things in. They didn't just click the box and move on. So yeah, I think we're still going to be okay with screen sharing and Messages and all that stuff. So maybe someday we can have it go back the other way and we can do screen sharing from iOS. Wouldn't that be cool? Actually, maybe we can. I didn't test that on iOS. Oh, maybe that would be kind of nice because right now, Apple has their, you can do remote access, but Apple has no client for iOS to do remote access. You got to run something like, Adobe's Screens, which is great, by the way. But, it's weird that Apple doesn't provide that path. So anyway, thoughts on that one, John, before we move on to Brent here?
Nope.
Okay. Brent writes, and he says, I have questions about internet speeds in bridge mode. He says he's with Comcast, and he just upgraded to the gigabit plan with Xfinity. With that came Xfinity's XB6 gateway. He says, I have a Netgear R8500 router, and I set the XB6, so the cable modem, into bridge mode because it's a gateway. So now, if it's in bridge mode, it's essentially just a dumb cable modem unless it gets reverted out of bridge mode, which can happen without you doing. So just to bear in mind, that's not his issue here. But he says the modem is connected to the router by a Cat5e cable. Okay, great. He says, I noticed while testing with devices in the same room as the router/modem, speeds of about 250 to maybe 300 megabits per second down and only 10 up. Using the speed test directly in the Netgear app, I get about 400 down and 40 up. I power cycled both devices, same results. I then connected directly to the XB6. I disabled bridge mode and I turned off my router and was getting 400 to 500 megabits per second and 40 up. I've read that there's a bug with the XB6 and bridge mode. I've tested with my 2013 iMac running 10.15.5. This is connected via Ethernet and Wi-Fi. I've tested with my iPhone 11 Pro, also running the latest iOS. Of course, that's on Wi-Fi. So he says, my questions. Did you have the same issues or do you have your own modem? The R8500, he says, is a little old, but I believe it should handle more speeds than that. And would I be better off just running the XB6 as the router? So he says, I was looking at different cable modems, like the Surfboard SB8200, which is a DOCSIS 3.1 cable modem. Would that be a better route to go? So good questions. The downstream speeds of 400 to 500, that's about what I get in, great circumstances with Wi-Fi on my downstream. But, and on Ethernet, I get, because I have the same gigabit Comcast plan that he does, on gigabit, I get about 950 down, which is about the max that you'll get with gigabit. And those are some reasonable maximums. So my first thought would be when you're testing, it's good these days, in fact, to have both Wi-Fi and Ethernet on your Mac. So if your Mac is connected Ethernet, you also want to have Wi-Fi on so you can take advantage of things like the continuity mode stuff and unlocking with, your Apple Watch and all of those things. It's good to have Wi-Fi on. However, you need to make sure that Wi-Fi is not the top thing in the list. You want Ethernet to be the top thing in the list so that your internet connection is going out over Ethernet and Wi-Fi is just used for local stuff. So you do that by going into System Preferences, Network, and look, you should see green lights next to both Ethernet and Wi-Fi. That's good. Make sure Ethernet is at the top and Wi-Fi is below it. If it's not, hit the little settings gear in that list and choose Set Service Order. And then you can drag things around to make it so that Ethernet is at the top. All right, so that's number one. But as far as the slowdown, this is interesting. It's been a while. I used to use an R8500 for as my main router for a very long time, and I loved that thing. I didn't run Netgear's firmware on it, but for the most part, I ran the DD-Wirt firmware, which we loved for a decade or more here. It was great. However, that router, the CPU in it isn't, it's not a modern CPU. That router's been around for, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 years maybe. So it had a fast CPU at the time, a really fast one, which is why I liked it. But it's possible that you've got some sort of QoS on getting in the way of this. Either, buffer bloat protection, or you might have your router's QoS numbers set lower than your internet speeds now. Because that 10 to 40 thing, when you said you have upstream of only 10, and yet when you do the speed test inside the router, it does 40, that tells me that your router is somehow artificially slowing things down. So Netgear, the way Netgear does their WAN-based QoS, i.e. their buffer bloat protection, is you go in, and I don't know the exact path, but in Netgear, you find QoS, and it will ask you to set your own speeds for your downstream and your upstream. And you're supposed to set those to about 90% of what you actually get. And you can have it be smart about it and set them from a speed test inside the router. Sometimes depends on the firmware version and how they've implemented it. But the good news is with a DOCSIS 3.1 cable modem, even if you don't have gigabit speeds, just as long as you're running that DOCSIS 3.1 modem, you don't have to worry about buffer bloat anymore because it's taken care of inside the modem. So I would say go in and turn that stuff off. A, you stop from artificially limiting yourself. But B, even if you put in your gigabit speeds, I'm not convinced the CPU of that router, back to our conversation we were having about like the internet appliances that can filter your stuff, the CPU's got to process data fast enough to get gigabit speeds through, and it might not be able to do that with the older CPU. So go ahead and just turn it off. And let the router handle the buffer, let the cable modem handle the buffer bloat because it has to. DOCSIS 3.1 mandates that it has the better queuing algorithm, and then you're good to go. And sure enough, actually, we heard from Brent, and he was like, "Yeah, I turned off QoS, everything's fine." He's like, "I had it set to what my old speeds were." I'm like, yeah, it happens. It's too many. We like to be geeks, right, John? But when we have too many things to tweak, we sometimes forget what we've tweaked. So.
Yeah, I had the same or something similar with when I was on a TP-Link.
Yep.
Was it an Archer? I forget.
Yeah.
But it had one feature in the firmware. It was like turbo boost. But by the way, it may actually make matters worse. So.
Yeah, the R8500 had that hardware acceleration mode or whatever. If you ran the Netgear firmware, and I remember they tried it in the DD-Wirt firmware, and it would just like crater the thing. But at least initially, they probably got it. But yeah, you can make things worse. Factory reset isn't necessarily a bad thing if you've got things tied in knots. I mean, we'd much rather be surgical in our approach and like this with turning off just QoS. But sometimes, especially if you're running around with different firmware versions, sometimes the factory reset's the easiest one. So Anyway. Should we talk about upgrading an old Mac Mini, John?
Yes.
Okay.
So Mark writes, John, aka Mr. Mac Mini, and Dave, king of the keyboard. What type of keyboard? I ask.
I don't.
Different keyboards.
Yeah.
Yeah, you play keyboards, right?
I actually do. I've been playing piano longer than I've been playing the drums. Believe it or not. I'm far more proficient at the drums than I am at the piano, but the piano, I understand the piano. Speaking of which, by the way, I know this is a total detour. We'll go get to Mark shortly here. I teased this out at the end of the last episode, but the Macworld All-Star Band has played WWDC now. In that, for the last 6 weeks, maybe more than that, so maybe 6 or 8 weeks ago, a listener to this show named Terry Austin wrote me and said, with all this like at home quarantining stuff, you guys, the Macworld All-Star Band, should record a song. And I thought, that's, I like the idea. I honestly never thought it would go anywhere, but it was a great excuse to text all my Macworld All-Star Band bandmates and friends and just check in with them because, we'd all been quarantined and I wanted to see how everybody was doing. And so I did. I shared this idea as sort of a great way to, rekindle. We have a text group that, it's basically dormant for like 8 or 10 months. And then somebody will have something and then it'll flare up and we'll talk for a couple of days and then it sort of peters out again. So I thought, great. This is an excuse. And so it turned into a thing. And we recorded in our own homes, all 7 of us recorded our instruments and our vocals. And everybody sent their tracks and videos of themselves recording their tracks to me. I didn't do anything with the videos but I did mix the entire project. There were 46 audio tracks in the end with 6 buses. John, I've never mixed any audio before. Like I've never mixed an entire song before in my life. So to start with one of this magnitude was probably not the right place to start, but I certainly learned a ton. And my daughter, Skylar, absolutely, like she's listed as co-producer on the credits and absolutely deserves it. She was huge in helping get the mix right and assigning different vocal parts and like really like the production of it. She was really involved with. So we mixed it here. And then once we had a final mix, we sent that and all the videos to Wally Cherwinski, who was the one that used to manage all the videos and produce all the videos and record all the videos of our Cirque de Mac parties where the Macworld All-Star Band played. So we got Wally back involved. Wally mixed it all together, and we have a version of Feeling All Right, our version, our quarantine version that we released this just last week during WWDC. So we joke that we've now played WWDC, and I think it came out pretty good. I'm actually pretty proud of it. So it's pretty fun to do all that. So anyway, there you go. And I give our one of our bass players, Chuck Latornis, credit for coming up with the idea of using this with the awareness that it generates to encourage folks to donate to the Musicians COVID Relief Fund at Music Cares, which is through the Grammys. They've done some fantastic things. They've helped some musicians I know. So that's what we're using the publicity for, is to help out musicians that can't play gigs and need help. So anyway, there you go. Should we go to Mark now, John?
Awesome.
Should I circle back? Sorry.
So Mark inherited a Mac Mini that was unused for many years. He turned it on. To his surprise, Windows 7 loaded. Ooh. I have an El Capitan USB that I put in, then rebooted. It was not read. I can read the USB in Windows on the Mac Mini. Don't think I've heard this question before. How do I remove Windows and install Mac OS on the Mac Mini? The Mac Mini has 8 gigs of RAM. I saw 2 4-gig chips, so that may give you an idea of its age. Then he followed, so I started churning on this, but then he followed up and said, gents, I attached an Apple keyboard and mouse, held the Option key. As John has said many times, the Option key adds many things to menus in the boot sequence. During boot, and voila.
Voila.
Or voila.
That's how we spell voila. Yeah.
I got the option to choose which operating system to load. Now the question is, how do I disable the dual boot feature? Okay, another question. One final update. I have decided to return it to the junk pile, as it is a 2010 and one-run Catalina, but it does have a CD drive. I spent 2 good hours trying to find my OS X installed disk, which I never did find. But thank you for... But So too bad he's going to put it on the junk pile, but it is an old machine. But
Sure.
he asked all these questions, so he needs answers, or at some point in the future, he needs answers.
Right.
So first, Dave, according to Mac Tracker, this is one of the Macs where Apple doesn't tell you the maximum amount of RAM that it can handle. So I just noticed this when I was looking up this machine. Actually, you can get 16 gigs in that machine. But I think it's still a Core Duo or Core 2 or maybe a Core Duo. So it's still not, a powerhouse.
Sure.
Relatively speaking. But to answer his question about booting into things, yes, if you hold down the Option key when you boot your Mac, this enables what they call the Startup Manager, which will show you all the eligible partitions or things that you can boot from. And it sounds like he wanted to disable this, maybe. And the thing is, you can do this, Dave. I haven't done this in a while, but I tested it on my machine here. If you set something called a firmware password, so usually you go into recovery and there's a utility that lets you set that in one of the menus.
Yeah.
If someone then tries to enable the Startup Manager, it's going to prompt for the password. So this is a way to protect your Mac from people booting into places that you may want them to boot into.
Yeah, right.
And that still works, even on my latest machines here.
Right.
Now, the other thing is, it sounds like he didn't have a working installer, because it sounds like he couldn't boot from a USB stick to, just wipe the whole thing out.
Sure.
But Dave, there are a couple of ways that you can create an installer. So one, Apple actually has an article that goes through the details for various releases of Mac OS. But
Okay.
you can actually create an installer using the steps that they provide from the terminal. And here, this updated my knowledge of this, there's still something, Dave, called DiskMaker 10, which will also make an installer disk. But here's the nice thing, is that they also have links to prior versions of Mac operating system that you can download.
Nice. That's good. Yeah.
Because getting older versions of Mac OS is, and yeah, this machine, as he pointed out, will not run the latest.
Right.
I think it went up to 10.6 or something, and he said he was, I forgot what he said it was running. Anyways, I got that all out of my system there. So
Good.
Hopefully that'll come in handy if you ever run into the situation before. But yeah, I agree that machine is dated.
Yeah. Probably so. All right. Well, where are we on time? Yeah, I think we're. I think that's going to do it for us today, John. Right?
Wrap it up.
It's time to wrap it up. Yeah, it's got to bring in the band, different band, but bring in the band just the same. Yeah. All right, folks. Thank you so much for listening. Good stuff this week, and a great week. We've had, I feel like in 7-8 days, we've done 3 podcasts, which is fun. Thanks for all the joining in on the WWDC show this week. That was great. I don't know why that episode, that one, it came together so quickly, John, because just by nature of what it was, that I didn't do all the extra prep that I've been doing since we moved to video, and it actually felt super smooth and comfortable, and we just went and did an episode. There was no, since we moved to video, my workflow has been naturally massively interrupted, and I try not to let that interrupt the show, but it means doing extra prep work. And I realized, that maybe I've gotten more into the routine, so it was kind of nice. I thought I liked doing it. It was fun. We have our premium program. We didn't mention that email address when we mentioned the other email address. And that is premium@macgeekgab.com. And anybody who contributes on our premium program, that's your way of helping us directly. And we certainly appreciate it. It's not mandatory, as you know. Listening to the show is by far the best thing you can do for us. Sending in your questions, contributing. There's many, many different ways, and our premium program is one of them. It's an important one, but it's not the only one. So if you can't or don't want to contribute that way, please don't feel obligated. But if you can and do, please do. And that's all at MacGeekGab.com/premium. I do like to take a minute each episode, or at least most episodes, and thank the folks whose contributions have come in recently. And so I would like to thank Ken from Honolulu, Dave from Saugerties, Greg from Garner, Richard from Melbourne, Michael from Robbins, Barry from Delray Beach, Matthew from Forked River, David from Mount Prospect, Scott from Bourbonnais, Clive from Burgess Hill, Frank from Tunbridge, David from Plainsboro, Jeff from Chesterton, Barry from Des Plaines. I think that's probably where he is, but he might be anywhere.
He's all over the place.
You never know. That's true. James from Melville, Joseph from Marietta, Antonio B. We don't have a location. Must be secret. Robert from Columbiana, Stephen from Plainfield, Brett H. William from Apollo Beach, Terrence from Avon Lake, Warren from Thompson Station, Kurt from Princeton, Joe from Kingsley, Ben from Berkeley, Karen from Chagrin Falls, Richard from Sands Point, and Jeffrey from Alamogordo. Thank you to all of you. Thanks to everybody that participates in that premium program. It makes a huge difference. It's a thing. Thanks for listening. Thank you for contributing. Thanks for checking out our sponsors links. Whether you buy, that's between you and them, but we do encourage you to check them out. And you can always do that at MacGeekGab.com/sponsors. I think that's all I got, John. Do you have anything else that we can ask them to do? Follow us anywhere? You got any thoughts on that?
Oh, well, if you want to follow us, not stalk us, though. Well, you can try. But, there's always Twitter.com, a great place to be, always full of very insightful and well-balanced and non-controversial content. Right? Anyway,
okay.
On Twitter, I am John F. Braun. He is Dave Hamilton. That other guy is Pilot Pete, piloting away. Sure.
Yeah.
Even today.
He did a cool cross-country flight recently. In a small plane. Yeah, I know. Yeah, I got to talk to him about it. I don't know. It's cool.
Oh, yeah, I've been in a small plane. You mean like a Cessna or something?
Yeah, Grumman, but four-seater. And
yeah, I was in one of those.
Yeah, but
it's actually kind of terrifying. At first, realizing
yes,
you just have this plastic shield between you and the elements, and it's like, wow, or glass.
It's glass and aluminum usually. Yeah. But it is.
And really noisy. Oh my god.
Yeah, well, you want to wear headphones for sure. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it you feel the air pockets far more than you do in a much larger plane. But I always like the thing I like about small planes is if the engine dies, you're in a glider. You're in pretty good shape. Whereas big plane, the engine dies. Those things don't really fly like gliders in that scenario. So.
Yeah. The one time I was in one, we actually, so when I did the corporate thing, one day we were like, you know what? Well, one of our guys has a pilot's license. Let's fly to, I think we flew to Block Island for lunch.
Sure. That's cool.
I think that expense report was...
Yeah, $100 hamburgers, we call those, right? Because you got to pay for the gas to get to and from. Yep. I love $100 hamburgers. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So what else on Twitter? So there's us, there's Mac Geek Gab, and there's Mac Observer also on Twitter if you want to see what we're doing.
Yep. Cool. That'll do it, folks. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks for, like I said, checking out our sponsors, the ones we mentioned in this episode, mintmobile.com/MGG, macsales.com, ancestry.com/MGG, smilesoftware.com/podcast, barebones.com, eero.com/MGG, linode.com/MGG. Check it all out. Another one almost in the can, John. Well, you started this, so I suppose it's up to me to finish this. I'll share one piece of advice that's broken down into 3 syllables, which also happen to be 3 words. and they are, don't get caught.
Made on a Mac.
And we're out. Cool